Hello, my loves. Today we're going to look at some more Reddit stories, and if you've enjoyed a Reddit story, why don't you consider hitting the subscribe button? Maybe that's the notification bell too, and let's start with today's story. Boss from Hell Gets What She Deserves. I, a 30-year-old, have been a people pleaser to a fault my whole life. I have been working in marketing for 10 plus years. Over the years, I've had my fair share of bosses who were good, average, and some who sucked. There is one in particular that stood out as awful. This story is from about 5 plus years ago. Pamela, 40-year-old, not real name, was the VP of marketing and sales for a mid-size retailer. She started at the company a few years after I did. And if rumors were true, she was the fourth pick for the position and was simply hired so the company could appease shareholders. I was a manager under her, and my whole job was to make sure the website and stores had their products merchandised properly, received all their monthly sales materials, managed advertising, set up and managed the department's budget, PM'd all department projects and operations, created reporting to reflect sales, managed presentations, creative briefs for future projects, etc. In short, I did her work and all the administrative grunt work to keep the department afloat. I managed all this because I had access to her email and many times sent emails on her behalf to keep the department functioning. Pamela spent most of her time showing up after 10 a.m., taking business lunches, and planning company parties. Don't even know why we did those, but I planned those too. I consistently questioned why she spent so much of our budget on these events when we didn't have the budget resources for any of it. Pamela told me to take from future months' budgets to pay for the current month's overspending. So, at the start of every month, I had an original budget, and by the end of the month, I had to turn in an edited budget edited under Pamela's direction that made it look like Pamela's spending was under control. This is important for later. I definitely made mistakes here and there being in charge of so many tasks and constantly found myself working 12-hour days split between being in the office and working after my kid went to bed. Weekend work was also done before my family woke up and after they went to bed. During Pamela's first major holiday season, sales were shit. Pamela kept changing her mind on the visuals for the stores, kept bringing on new advertising and PR agencies to bring in sales. All these agencies consisted of her personal friends, and ignored our buying merchandise team's planned promotions for her own better ones. At this time, I had been dealing with an ongoing infection that turned to sepsis and was hospitalized. The doctors and my husband said it was due to the stress of work and that I needed to take a break. As I recovered, I realized how much I was hurting myself, my family, and even the company I worked for. Eventually, my old habits got to me, and I got on my phone and checked mine and my boss's emails. What I found made my blood boil. First, I got a lovely bouquet of flowers from upper management wishing me well, and I knew that Pamela organized the delivery. She sent me her favorite flowers. I went to her inbox to put the receipt in the correct folder to send to accounting when I got back. At the top of her inbox from the past 3 days were emails clearly not related to business. What I found in her emails was Pamela emailing her personal friends griping on how I can't just shake off sepsis and get back to work. She also complained that she couldn't find any of my notes, spreadsheets, or documents for any of the work she was technically in charge of. They were on our shared drive labeled very clearly. Finally, I found an email where she sent a friend from a previous company asking for advice on how to bring in sales and save her job. In this long thread, this old colleague asked if there was anyone managing most of the work, and of course, Pamela said I was. This colleague explained that clearly it was my mismanagement that was causing issues and that I could be blamed if sales didn't pull through by the end of the season. Pamela mentioned that I was in the hospital and repeated comments from her other email thread. This person said that she couldn't outright fire me because it could seem like retaliation because I needed to take emergency medical leave. But, if Pamela could prove I was stealing from the company or misusing company resources, then she would have grounds to have me fired and use me as a scapegoat. Upon my return, Pamela called me into her office and said she was worried I was taking on too much and wanted to take work off my plate. she announced was taking managing the department budget off my plate. She asked me to only drop of a small stack of invoices to accounting. Additionally, Pamela told me under no circumstances was I allowed to talk to accounting about anything regarding budgets. Also, if I had any concerns about the department or workload, I wasn't allowed to go to HR, I had to discuss it directly with Pamela. Oh yeah, I could see where this was going. Unfortunately for Pamela, I had built a rapport with Lois, 50-year-old, not real name, who was our main accountant. Lois always said that she would do everything in her power to help me should I ask. Knowing this, I grabbed the stack of invoices off Pamela's desk to give to accounting. I also added the email threads I read while I was in the hospital, and the current unedited budget that Pamela hadn't touched yet for the month. I also found in my filing cabinet the hard copies of old budgets with Pamela's handwriting on what numbers to change to balance our budget. Finally, I added an email from our first round of budget adjustments where Pamela subtly threatened to put someone else in my job if I couldn't do what she asked. So, I walked and dropped off the invoices to accounting when I bumped into Lois. She brought up invoices, and I sternly looked at her and said Pamela is the only one in our department that Lois is allowed to talk to about our budget and invoices. Lois saw the suspiciously thick file folder on her desk, gave a firm nod, and lovingly kicked me out of her office. Within the week, Pamela was fired. From what I understand, she has been continually job hopping for the past few years. The CEO and HR brought me in to personally apologize for everything I went through and gave me a paid 1-week vacation to take at my discretion. Given other issues with this business, I left after another year. Which brings me to today. I am, once again, a manager for sales and marketing. I have a wonderful boss, Mike, 40-year-old, who trusts my business decisions and backs me up on practically everything. We are hiring my team for me to solely manage and direct. Today, I looked through the applicants and found Pamela's resume sitting among dozens of others. I stared at her name, wondering how many other people share her name. Upon review, yup, it's her. She definitely fell down the corporate ladder, with VP of our old company being the highest title she earned. And, to no surprise, she embellished her achievements, claiming the work I managed as her own, and claimed she generated an 87% sales growth during the holiday season at our previous company. As a people pleaser, who firmly believes in giving everyone a chance, it has never been so satisfying to click disqualified. Story: An attorney's dream case, my parents versus the bank. In 1973, my parents had enough money to build a little ranch house in the country. The small bank in town approved the mortgage and the bank signed a contract to give Bob the money to build the house. Bob, as it turns out, was overbooking himself all over town, leaving his clueless minions to do the actual work. The build took longer and longer, with more and more work having to be ripped out and redone. We're not talking about using the wrong color paint or nailing up some wonky trim here. The architect forgot to fully erase a line on the blueprints and the framers built a wall through the bathtub. My mother was told don't put anything heavy in the kitchen cabinets BC they were attached to the drywall, not the studs, using a few roofing nails through the back of each cabinet. The garage door opening was framed into the living room instead of towards the driveway. And so on. When the bank's representative showed up for the final inspection, my parents met him in the front yard and refused to sign off on Bob's work. Then representative became angry, as the bank had paid Bob a lot of money. He strode to the front door and pulled on the doorknob, whereupon the entire door, casing included, fell on him. It had simply been wedged, not nailed, into place. The bank called Bob, who finally showed up to supervise the work himself. The only problem was that Bob wasn't any better at building a house than his minions were. My parents still refused to sign off on the house. My mother was a somm in a nasty rental with 2 tiny children while my dad was working 2 jobs while this was going on. Throughout the entire process, the bank and Bob treated them very poorly, bullying my mom and lying to my dad. What should have been an exciting time for my parents was ruined. My mom cried a lot. My dad got depressed. Finally, the bank threatened my parents with foreclosure and Bob threatened to sue my parents for breach of contract. The bank refused to pay him any more money. So my exhausted parents went to an attorney and gave him the rundown. Plumbing, electrical, tiling issues, the whole sorry mess. My parents were scared. All they had was their small down payment savings, so if this became a lengthy court battle, the bank and Bob would win. The attorney, Tom, was kind, but my dad said he could tell that he and Mom were doomed from Tom's facial expressions as he sorted through the paperwork. Then, abruptly, Tom smiled. "Let's get everyone together for a meeting," he told my parents. "Tomorrow." So my parents, Tom, the bank's representative, the bank's attorney, Bob, and Bob's attorney met at the bank. Tom didn't give anyone else time to begin. He said, "Well, my clients had decided that they no longer want this house. Please remove it." Everyone else started to laugh. "Remove it? Have you lost your mind?" Tom, in a sweeping, theatrical gesture, placed a deed on the table. "My clients own the land the house is sitting on outright. They no longer want the house. Get the house off my client's land." Bob's attorney stared at the deed, and then turned and stared at Bob. "You built a house on land you don't own?" Bob nodded. The bank's attorney started yelling at the bank's representative. "You didn't finance the land the house is on?" The representative stammered, No." Tom said firmly, "As I said, gentlemen, you're trespassing on my client's land. I expect the house to be removed and the land returned to its original state, at once." My dad said he'll remember the blank looks everyone on the other side of the table passed to one another for his whole life. Sure, the bank could foreclose on a house that wouldn't exist by the end of the week, with no way to recoup the money. They didn't even own the land it was on. Bob was out the 50% he'd paid out of pocket, plus he was on the hook for tearing down the house and removing it. On top of that, the bank would undoubtedly want him to repay the initial 50% they'd given him. Could they have gone after my parents? Sure. A foreclosure would have meant bad credit for my parents moving forward. They might lose their down payment. But to sign off on the house in its condition at that time would have meant thousands and thousands of dollars in cash to replace/repair everything from the roof to the basement before the house could be safely lived in. The bank knew my parents didn't have that kind of money. They're the ones who approved the mortgage. Suddenly, my parents were good people. It was all such a misunderstanding, and the bank and Bob couldn't do enough for them. The house was brought in line with the original blueprints and specifications immediately, at no extra cost to my parents, but at considerable cost to Bob. My parents signed the mortgage. Bob got the rest of his money, and just about broke even on the build. The bank's representative was fired. And Tom, attorney extraordinaire, got a stinging tale of triumph to recall to fellow attorneys for the rest of his life. Asterisk before you question this tale, please remember that 1973 was 50 years ago. Banks did things differently back then. Smaller rural banks, in particular, were not run the same way the bigger, city banks were. There were far fewer federal regulations, and in a smaller community people didn't always follow them, anyway. I'm pretty sure they don't always follow them now. Asterisk yes, they built a wall through the bathtub. No, I'm not making that up. I even left out how a plumber left his lunch bag on a partially built kitchen cabinet, but the cabinetmaker didn't feel it was his job to move the bag, so he left it there and built the rest of the cabinet around it. I don't know where Bob found these people, but they were gems, every one of them. Story: my landlord got not exactly what he deserved, but it sure was a rough ride for him. I had a landlord who was pretty absent. I lived in this building, a high-rise, like 20 stories, for 10 years. He, despite living next door to me, was absent and cold personally, but cool enough. Rent was good, our agreement was never bother him about anything unless it's an absolute emergency. Shower head wonky, go buy a new one. Fridge breaks, get it fixed, or dude, just buy a new one. Take it out of what you pay in rent. Lost the receipt. I don't care, I know more or less what a fridge costs, just take it out of rent. Finally his wife decides she wants more rent, wants to rent the place out as an office, not legal, and wants us out ASAP. I agree to move out a month early and get a month's rent back and deposit. Complete 180 on their part. The place is ruined, can't give you shit until you fix all this stuff. Two main things. My cats did scratch up the leather legs of the dining table, and the pull-up bar made 2 dents in the doorframe of the kitchen, which was quite nice hardwood. They come to me with this list of tons of stuff like, oh, you hang a photo frame here, this tile is slightly chipped. This is the busiest work time of the year for me, but I'm trying to be cooperative. Sure, I got the table legs re-leathered, spackle the photo frame wall hole. Can't do anything about the door frame, take it out of deposit. Patch the tile. Like dozens of little everyday wear and tear things, like you want me to change the window screens. These are all new screens and in nicer shape than when I moved in. But I did them all, I trusted the guy. Gotta get my money at the end. He should have been giving me 24k RMB, 2,500 pounds. He gave me 5. I still need to use the money to fix all that stuff. If you can't accept the 5, I can't give you anything at all. I was super pissed off, but took the 5. Now, people in the building are gossipy. I don't participate, but I did tell this one older lady about my frustration. She told everyone. The wife went from being the star of the mommies group of the building to nobody wanting to talk to her. People shunned the guy, too. I originally told them I was planning on moving to another city, but an opportunity came up and I ended up renting a similar unit in the same building. So they thought they could just screw me over and not have to see me, but now they still did. Often. A year later the office calls me with some question about how to do something with the floor heating. I go, door frame is not fixed, still has dents. I call the guy like, what the hell, man, and he tells me to mind my own business. 5 years later, I see the light at my old place is still on at 3 a.m. Huh, that's odd. I go to check, the door is open, and the place is just trashed, ruined. Cabinets broken, stuff on the walls, lazy landlord, and the dents on the kitchen doorframe are still there. So the guy never fixed anything, just kept my money. By this time smartphones were popular and we had a chat group for the whole building, so about 500 people. I took pictures and posted everything. Apparently he had also nicked these people's deposit, and there was a huge ruckus when they trashed the place. Cops called. All these people chime in with complaints and pictures. People smoking in the hallways, leaving leaky rubbish outside the front door, videos of people using foul language in front of children, dirty footprints. He got fined a lot for 1. Creating a public disturbance, 2. Degrading the quality of the living space, 3. Illegally renting a residence as an office, and to top it off the building management wouldn't grant him permission to have workers in to fix the place, so it sat there empty for like 6 months. The fines were big, too. Take 1.5 months rent from me, lose a year's rent. Suck it, bro. Story, 401k with a side of revenge. Someone suggested I post this story over here. Enjoy. When our first child was born, my ex forced me to quit my job. When our second child was 2, I found out about his affair. By then he was extremely verbally, emotionally, and sometimes physically abusive. When he abused our firstborn, I put him out. That was in 2012. I couldn't afford daycare to work and had no family support. He refused to give me any money to take care of the kids, saying, "The courts haven't ordered me to give you a dime." He lied to the bank and had my accounts frozen and even assaulted me when I filed for default in the divorce. The judge finally ordered him to pay child and spousal support 6 months after I kicked him out. It was $2,562 a month. He refused to pay it until the garnishment kicked in, and by then he was $6,000 behind in support. I used that to get permission to move away. I remarried a year after the divorce. I checked the court docs and there was a little box that said spousal support stopped upon remarriage if that box was checked. It wasn't checked, so I figured I was good. Instead of filing for his retirement, I just took that year of spousal support, $12,000, and left it alone. Spousal support was only ordered for 2 years in 2017, he filed for sole custody of the kids out of nowhere. That was when he found out I had remarried and he had paid spousal support to me during the first year of my marriage. I told him I took that money instead of filing for my share of his retirement. I said if he let me keep that 12K, I wouldn't file to split his 401K. He demanded that I repay the spousal support. The judge ordered me to repay it but increased child support and deducted the repayment from that. It ended up that I got an extra $20.00 a month and he repaid himself. He dropped his bid for custody in exchange for 2 extra weeks in summer. I pursued the retirement account split. He refused to cooperate and dragged it out for 4 years. It was so bad, they sanctioned him and he had to pay me $600 a month for a year in addition to child support. They also charged him with contempt. In January 2021, he proposed to his girlfriend. In May of 2021, I finally got the disbursement from his 401k. I won't say how much it was, but it was about 4 times the amount of spousal support overpayment. I had no idea it would be that much. I had thought it would be around 12K, which is why I thought keeping that year of spousal and not filing for his retirement account was a fair trade. Had he not tried to take the kids from me, I never would have filed to split the account. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. His fiancée emailed me recently and told me it is my fault he won't marry her because I cleaned out his retirement account. She said I shouldn't have stolen his money. I told her that I gave him the option to let me keep that year of spousal support or take it back and I could file for his retirement. He chose to have me file for his retirement. I told her that if he really wanted to marry her and protect his assets, they could get a prenup so he wouldn't have to worry about it. She said she shouldn't have to sign a prenup because I robbed him. I never asked to be financially dependent on him. He clearly indicated he wanted a court order to take care of his kids, so I got him one. I tried to be fair and take the lesser amount by taking the spousal support and not filing for his retirement. He wouldn't let me. In summary, my ex refused to pay me until support orders dropped, refused to pay until they revoked his license. Tried to get me in trouble for accepting spousal support overpayment, and in the end it cost him a lot of money out of his 401k. Story: landlord screwed with the wrong tenant for too long. Minor details might not be entirely accurate as I've no interest in a revival of this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any resurrection can only taint the experience. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time I worked many different types of security in many different locations. The one that matters for this story was time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city as a kind of bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think a courtroom in a major city anyway. In a smaller town it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or community center, as you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing to landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes, and is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff, and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years I worked at the rental housing tribunal. It was early in my time in security. I was 18 to 20-ish. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. Noon is capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, as a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying, and always inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an adjudicator myself. Well, no, obviously not, but I'm certainly in no need of a lawyer either should I ever have need to go there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like, for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer. Or how pissed off adjudicators would get when a party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province, same tenant laws. I have a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We get along well. But there's a problem. Only I can write checks, and our paydays don't line up. So I'm the one who pays the rent, and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay in time. We advise the landlord we might be a day or two late, but we'll always have it by the third at the latest. They have no problem with it at all. I spoke to them myself. For about a year this works fine. No complaints from landlord because even if we're often a day or two late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. Nearly model tenants. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly we got a summons to the Rental Housing Tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day. But now we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid in order to serve the summons. I bitched to the neighbor who was also the superintendent and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding first of the month no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15 to 20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times I can ding them for harassment, but I don't have time for that and my roommates don't care. After being split between us, all the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behavior, so we accepted it. If this was the only issue, there wouldn't be much story though. At around the same time, the rent leeway vanished, so did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at shit pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years it broke. Everyone but me up and moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details on my roommates at all because things kinda exploded for a couple different reasons outside of this. No reason to dig any of that up. I had been saving up a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with, and with my experience in the RHT I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month. But I did the second. So I went. With a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves. So I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up, 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there, for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons, and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20 to 30 pages of evidence and 20-odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them once. That led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee, and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower I had, so only a squeak came out, the adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had one on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end, I thought he'd have a heart attack. He didn't though. By Mart. Story: a lawyer's pro-revenge on his boss. This opinion is shit, my boss told me. He'd been a lawyer for 3 years, and the firm assigned me to him for training, to show me, junior counsel, how to be a litigator. I disliked my boss for a number of reasons. He knew no law, and he expressed himself badly in writing. For a litigator, that's like strike 1 and 2 right there, and strike 3 was this: he had no balls. He was actually scared of going to court. I noticed this when he took me to assignment court one day, and when it was his turn to speak his hands were shaking. He was scared, in fucking assignment court, where all you do is set a trial date. What's wrong with what I wrote? I said. Not what I asked for, he said, turning away. But when I checked the memo he'd emailed me 2 weeks earlier, I saw that the opinion I wrote was exactly what he asked for. I knew what was up. He was going to delete my dockets for writing the memo and then claim he did it himself, thus leaving quite a bit short of my docketing quota for the month. I knew that he would do this to me because he'd done this before. I knew that my memo would wind up on a partner's desk without my name on it. I knew that for a fact, because the firm I worked at was one of the first in the city to have a really good internal network. We were using email for internal communications before the internet became a thing. So the firm was way ahead in terms of technology, but not in terms of security, and not long after I joined the firm I learned how to surf away on the firm's hard drive and find interesting things, like evidence that my boss was plagiarizing my work. My boss was the very model of the young downtown lawyer. His perfect shoes always gleamed. He wore bespoke suits because he came from money. Everyone just took it for granted that he was on the partner track. I, on the other hand, was well on my way to nowhere special, so maybe he thought it was okay to fuck with me. If so, that was a big mistake on his part. I didn't like having my billable hours fucked with. I seriously resented it, because I was already being targeted as one of the juniors who doesn't docket as much as he should, and I was getting pushback from the partner who headed our team. I told the partner what was going on, but he didn't care. It was like being back in middle school and showing up in the office with bruises on my face and the principal saying boys will be boys and sending me on my way. You'll just have to work harder, or smarter, the partner said when I reported the latest bullshit thing my boss did to me. I couldn't work harder, I was doing the usual 6 days a week lawyers downtown are forced to do, but I could work smarter, and that night I thought up a plan. Christmas was coming, and I thought I'd give my boss a little present. It landed on his desk on December 24th, in the form of a memo purporting to be from the partner that my boss reported to. The partner was an old guy, and not really on board with emails and computers, so he did everything old school, on paper. So when my boss came in on December 24th and saw a memo on his desk from the partner with a legal research assignment, that wasn't unusual. The memo was drafted in the usual form that the partner used, because of course I had taken great pains to make sure that it looked authentic. My boss walked over to the little cubicles where the juniors worked and gave me the same memo. Except his secretary had retyped it, so now the assignment was from him to me, instead of from the partner to my boss. The assignment was difficult, requiring me to do a deep dive into admiralty law, its relationship to the common law, combined with a constitutional division of powers question. But this is a huge assignment, I whined, and I'm going to be away. Can't you get someone else to do it? Is it really urgent? The memo I'd forged to my boss stressed how totally urgent the situation was, but there was no way my boss could double-check with the partner, because the partner left the day before on vacation. That's why I'd waited until December 24th. No can do, my boss said, this is a big deal. Just let HR know. Maybe they'll give you time and half or something. He turned his back and walked away, thinking he had ruined my holidays. But he was mistaken. You see, I'd written a paper for a third-year course that was basically the same thing as the research assignment in the memo. So the only work I had to do was to find the old floppy disk with the draft on it, fiddle with it a bit, and voila, a very detailed and very long memo on an obscure point of Admiralty law, with references starting back to Lord Coke's day. So I put the memo together and took my holidays as planned. I wasn't traveling anywhere, because I had no money, but I saw my family and stayed in town, and I made a point of dropping by the office during the holidays, sending an email or two, establishing that I was around, and docketing all my time for the huge amount of research I was allegedly doing. So the holidays end, and I'm sitting in my shitty little cubicle with a huge stack of work to do, and my boss comes up to me, in one of his bespoke suits with a gold tie pin and cufflinks to match. He was wearing a gold watch, too. He was dressed up, even for him, trying to make an impression of some kind. Where's that memo? You were supposed to have it on my desk when I got back. I'm going into a meeting at noon. Just finished it this morning, I said, handing him the lengthy memo that was still warm from the printer. My boss took the memo in his hands and felt its heft, and he smiled. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Just before lunch, I heard a commotion down the hall. It was a pretty loud commotion, as such things go, a loud fuck, and then a door was flung open. It was the partner, and he was screaming for my boss to get his ass into his office, now, right now, as in immediately. I had the pleasure of watching my boss scramble down the hall. Just what the fucking fuck is this, the partner said, standing in the doorway to his office, and holding my handiwork at arm's length with his thumb and index finger, as if he were afraid that handling it would soil him. My boss mumbled something, and then the partner ushered him inside. I heard more shouting, then the sound of muffled excuses, and then more shouting from the partner. Then the door flung open again. Called in the 90s. Get your ass in here, too, the partner said, and I got my ass in there pronto. Did you write this fucking memo? The partner said. I took it from him and looked it over. I wrote it. The cover page has been changed to remove my name, but other than that, it's mine. I spent all Christmas on it. Is there something wrong with it? The partner exploded. Is there something wrong with it? Something wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It's fucking useless. Totally useless. I explained that I'd followed my boss's instructions to the letter, and that I'd docketed more than 100 hours on it. At this, the partner really went nuts, and told me to go back to my desk and fetch him the memo from my boss. I brought it to him, and when he read it, his face went red. He told me I could leave, and I hauled ass out of there. From my little cubicle, I wasn't close enough to hear the full chewing out my boss got, but I heard the details through the grapevine over the next few days, about how the partners were seriously pissed that my boss had wasted over 100 hours of a junior's time on a useless task that was obviously a prank, and how had my boss not realized that he was being pranked? Was he an idiot? I wasn't blamed at all, of course. I had been working under my boss's close supervision. My boss didn't get fired, but there were some good outcomes for me. For one thing, the partner told me to send him a copy of any memos I wrote for my boss, and that ended him taking credit for my work. My boss also stopped deleting my dockets for my research. Plus, I got a belated Christmas bonus for having to give up on my alleged vacation to write the stupid memo. I really hated working in that place, but whenever times were tough, I'd think back to the case of the forged memo, and that always brought a smile to my face. Story: Got rude guy arrested for suspended license. This story takes place about 20 years ago. In the mid-2000s, my friends and I would frequent a small billiards place in a neighboring town where you could rent a table by the hour or play per game. We'd play a few games, watch whatever sports were on TV, and have casual conversations. There were no problems and no drama until about 3 months of us visiting this place. A guy shows and takes our spot at the billiards table. No big deal. We were all chatting anyway. 20 minutes later my friend lets him know we want to play next game and the jerk is super dismissive. Needless to say, we didn't get in during the next game. So I politely let him know we wanted to play next. Another lady chimed in she wanted the game after us. The guy blatantly ignored me and the other woman. Some more time going by and the guy leave the table. We see our chance to get in. We put the quarters in and the balls are dispensed except the green 6 ball. The guy took it to the bathroom with him. At this point it was ridiculous and we notified the manager. The manager noted it was 12:30 and they were going to be calling last call and closing, so he didn't want to make a scene by kicking him out. He gets us another ball so we can play. The guy comes out of the bathroom and knows we realized what he did. He smirks and proceeds to the patio to have a cigarette, bringing along his beer and the green billiard ball. The guy comes back in and tossed the ball he was holding onto the table, hitting a few balls on the table and messing up our game. He goes up to the bar just in time for last call. One of the friends I was with suggested we follow him home and each call the highway patrol to report a suspected drunk driver. 3 of 4 of us agree. So when he leaves we used our trusty Nextel push-to-talk phones and coordinated several calls to the police. We provided details like license plate, vehicle, make and model and color, and mentioned the car nearly hit another vehicle, was swerving between lines and driving erratically. This was under a 15-minute plan. We had no idea where the guy lived, but suspected it was close as he was visiting a neighborhood place, so our time was limited. The one guy who didn't notify the police tailed the jerk and called the skiddy when a police officer pulled between him and the guy and turned in his lights to pull him over. The police blotter that week included an arrested of a guy who was pulled over after multiple calls of erratic driving. He wasn't arrested for DWI, but instead for driving on a suspended license. Story: try and get my team member fired, get deported. I am not sure if this is pro-revenge, so I will let you all decide. If not, let me know and I will move it. I will say in advance sorry for the long one, but the backstory is relevant. Back in the early 2010s, I started working for a big internet-based company in the UK. The company was opening a new office with a new subdivision in London. When I started there were 2 team leaders and the office manager. The 2 teams were the content team and the SEO search engine optimization team. I was recruited to be the development team lead, that is web development. When I was interviewed for the job, both the office manager and SEO team lead were carrying out the interview. As you do in interviews, when they asked if this or that could be done, I would respond yes of course, or you would get a better result doing X, Y, or Z. So, I got offered the job and for the first year there was so much going on. As well as building a team, I also had a portfolio of websites that needed to be redeveloped and redesigned. It was at this point that some red flags started to pop up. I would have the SEO team lead, we will call him Andy, coming to me and telling me that I needed to do things the way he wanted. I would always push back and say no, and give a reason why I was doing things the way I was. Andy would get irate and would complain to the office manager about me. When the office manager would ask me about it, I would explain what had happened and why I had said no, and the office manager would leave it there because at the end of the day I was the one with the experience in web development, not Andy. This happened a few times over the first year, and I then realized that the reason that Andy was getting so irate was because he thought that I would be a yes man to him. Sorry buddy, that is not who I am. So, now that we have the backstory, let's get into what led to the revenge. Me and the team had been working hard to get 2 of the new websites completed, and I was due to show them off to the board before they went live. This company's head office was in another part of the country, and I had to leave the office in London at about lunchtime. So, I arrived to the hotel that is across the road from the head office about 4 p.m. and jump on my laptop to start going through the sites to run some tests. I was testing functionality, making sure the look and feel were correct, things like that. Then it happened, we found a major bug that caused a major issue with the functionality of the website. So it is at this point that I am going to introduce the star of our story, Johnny, not real name, but attacked all the same, who was my senior developer. Me and Johnny working through the night, me in the hotel room and him in the London office. We finally fixed the bug, about 7 a.m. the following day. My meeting with the board was at 10 a.m., so after getting showered, the feed, and over to the office, I started my day with 0 hours sleep. I go into the meeting, and the first thing that is said is the CEO asking if I was okay. I had met him a few times, and he was a really nice guy. I explained that we had found an issue with the sites yesterday and me and Johnny had worked through the night to fix it before the meeting. Long story short, everyone was really impressed and loved the new sites. At the end of the meeting, the CEO pulled me aside and thanked me for everything and then told me to go home and get some sleep. It was about a 3-hour train ride to London and then another hour home. I thanked him and went on my way. So, after taking my team out for a well-deserved lunch to say thank you, the office manager then organized a night out for the whole office to celebrate on the following Friday. We started off at a fancy bar, not my sort of thing. I am a man of cheap tastes, and then everyone moves on to a small club. I go to the club for a bit, but then leave quite early in the night as I need to get a train home. I say my byes and then head home. I come into the office on the Monday and there is something going on. I speak with Emma. Not real name, the content team's lead. She does not know what is going on, but there are people from head office, HR, and others. Then a few minutes later, all the team leaders are called into a meeting. We are all squished in one of the small meeting rooms. There is office manager, 2 members of the HR team from head office, and the 3 team leaders, including myself. So, HR explained that there has been a complaint made against Johnny. A member of the SEO team, we will call him Mark, had called Andy on the Friday saying that Johnny had been making racist comments while everyone was out at the club. Both myself and Emma were taken aback. This was not like Johnny. On a side note, I felt that I need to explain the races of people involved. This is just for context and not an attack on anyone involved. Johnny, Emma, and I are white British. Andy is African-born in Britain, I believe, and Mark is Indian once again, I believe. So, the whole day was spent with HR doing interviews with the other people that were there that night, and we then all reconvened towards the end of the day. The result of the interviews were that no one had heard anything like what Mark was saying. So, it was Mark's word against Johnny's. This was not acceptable for Andy. He wanted Johnny fired and cried we could not have someone like that in the office. So, both Emma and I looked at each other and though that it was strange that he was so instant on firing Johnny with no evidence. Both the office manager and HR agreed, and Johnny was let off with a warning and to be aware in the future of how things he says that could be misinterpreted. Life went back to normal in the office, that is until about 2 months later. The story of what had happened had gone round the office, about 12 people. Then one afternoon, I was pulled aside by one of the guys on the content team and he said that he had overheard Andy and Mark talking and thought I should know. We went into one of the meeting rooms and he laid everything out. What I heard made my blood boil, and I think had I been in a cartoon, steam would have been erupting from my ears. He told me that the racism complaint was faked and a plan that Andy had to attack my team because I would not bend to his demands. Him and Mark we on a call outside the club. Andy was not there that night, and that is when he heard what they were doing. It later came out that their plan was to make the complaint against Johnny and get him fired, which would then lead on to Andy complaining that I was not fit to run a team if I let that sort of this happen under my leadership. My first question was why he didn't bring this up with HR in the interviews. He said that he did, but it was his word against both Andy and Mark. I thanked him for this and went on with what I was doing. I was pissed. There was no way that I was going to let this slide, but I knew that if I was going to go after them, I needed to have everything in place beforehand. I didn't tell Johnny what I had been told and asked the guy that told me to keep it to himself for now. I didn't want Johnny to get pissed off and do something that would get him fired or worse, affect any revenge I could dish out. So, I watched. I watched everything the SEO team did and didn't do. Then it happened. It was like angels had descended from heaven to deliver me the winning lottery ticket. The building we were in was a 3-story building with a main stairwell with a door on each floor to the offices. The stairwell also led to a door out to the street. At the time I was a casual smoker and used it to get a break from the screen and clear my head if something I was working on was not going well. So, I walk out of the door to the office and into the stairwell, and who is there? Mark of all people. He is on the phone, and he goes white as a sheet when he sees me. Now he is mid-sentence with the person on the other end of the phone, and as I am walking past, he is forced to carry on the conversation. I overhear, and from what he is saying I can tell that he is talking to a school or something like that. The conversation sounding like he was looking for information about applying and about a visa. I thought that was a strange call to be having, and something was fishy about it. I had my suspicions as to what was going on, but nothing concrete at this time. A few days later I was heading back up to the head office, and by that time we had a new office manager who lived near the head office, so was based there most of the time. When I got there, I dropped my things off at the hotel and headed over to the office. I went to his desk and asked to have a quick chat. I explained to him what I had overheard Mark talking about on the phone, and said that maybe the company might like to look at his visa status. So, a week went by and nothing seemed to happen. Then bam! He stopped showing up to the office. A few days later I got told what had happened from one of the other SEO team members. Mark had been fired with immediate effect for no longer having the correct visa to work in the UK. The company did not want to get involved in sponsoring a new visa for him. I don't know why. I started asking questions around the office, random chit-chat, and I found out that Mark is from Dubai and he was here on his wife's student visa. I don't know how that works, but it was all above board. I also found out that his wife's course had finished and that left them with a small window of time to get a new visa. That is when it all clicked. Now there are some doggy people in London and everywhere else, and they would set up these fake collages that would sign people up to get visas to live and work into UK. At some point before or after this saw a program on this, and normally these were set up in tiny offices that you couldn't swing a cat in, let alone be a collage. They were as postal addressed for the collage, and they would charge a course fee to be enrolled and thus be able to apply for a student visa. So, what Mark was trying to do is to get enrolled in one of these collages so that he could stay in the UK and carry on working. I found out a few weeks later that Mark and his wife did have to leave the UK and go back to Dubai because he didn't have any money coming in to pay for his new collage course. By Mark. When I found out that Mark had been let go, I pulled Johnny aside and filled him in on everything. He could not believe it and was stunned that they would try and do that. I apologized to him as it was my fault that he had been targeted by them in a way to get at me. He would not accept it and said that I had gone above and beyond in defending him. Following on from this, I made it quite clear to Andy that I know what he and Mark had done, and I would not be forgetting it, and to watch his back I made sure we were not in earshot of anyone else. About 2 months later Andy handed in his notice and left the company, never to be seen or heard from again. I have told this story to some people over the years, and I have been asked so many times if I feel guilty for what I did. I always respond the same way: I feel guilty that Johnny was wrongfully accused and targeted. I don't feel guilty about what I did to Mark. You don't mess with my friends, family, or team. Story: I blew up a romance scammer's life. I blew up a romance scammer's life. This one is fresh and still unfolding, but it's already hit an explosive level. Some details intentionally vague. I'm a woman in my 30s with a reasonably good corporate type job in a field with lots of room for growth, and am recently back into the dating scene after a decade. I'm kind of a would-be a 10 if she lost 30 pounds looking girl, beautiful face if a bit chubby, but I never have issues getting a date. I'm not well off, but I'm stable and have a bit of spending money. I live in a large multicultural city and my ex was an immigrant, so I'm open to dating people of any origin. A few weeks ago, I met a very charming man from a Latin American country only a couple years younger than me. Seemed very sweet, cuddly, intelligent, family-oriented, emotionally available, educated, and in a good profession back home in his country, and had a lot in common with me. Chemistry seemed amazing inside and outside the bedroom. He was honest that he was in my country on a tourist visa but hoping to stay. I made it clear I wouldn't be able to help him with that, but we have a fun summer fling while he was here. If he managed to stay or come back, only then would we consider a real relationship. Then the other shoe dropped. A couple weeks and 4 dates in, during a text conversation about my work, he asked me to be his sugar mommy. I initially laughed and assumed it was a joke. He kept pushing and clearly said it wasn't. Of course, feeling insulted by this, I went off on him. He maintained it as a serious ask until I hit a nerve with my complaints about how embarrassed he should be to ask me that. Then he got angry and insulted me for thinking he was serious about it. No apology for being hurtful to me. Obviously, what I did next was take screenshots and cry about it to my closest friends. I was hurt that I was fooled into thinking he liked me and that he thought I needed to pay for a man. My friends started the fuse on what happened next. One of my friends started snooping more on his online presence. Together we found about 6 different Instagram accounts that were him using different variations of his name and different photos of himself, all uploaded in batches. On Facebook, a similar pattern. All very scammy and suspicious looking. He'd been foolish enough on one of his profiles though to follow and tag the employer that he was working for illegally on his tourist visa in my country. So I contacted another close friend in a local law enforcement agency that works with immigration. She looked up his file. He had a wife and daughter at home. I released the hounds after that. The friend who helped me investigate online made several group chats on multiple platforms with all of his family, immediate and extended, and friends. She released all the screenshots as well as a rant about how shameful it was. As they started blocking her, she added more people. I found his sister's phone number. She sent her messages on there too. Everyone he knows, including his wife, know he's unfaithful and trying to take advantage of women. 30 minutes after the online bombardment started, I got a rude message from him about how I should be smart enough to know he was joking and he doesn't need to sell himself. I didn't reply. Next step? Online immigration reporting form with all the info we found: work info, employer name and address, his home address, full name, DOB, photos, screenshots admitting to working. Usually these reports take months to be reviewed, if at all, but I gave the file number to my law enforcement friend. 2 days later, law enforcement officers visited him at home. They found him with a phone number that was issued to a local resident. All his roommates also had numbers issued to the same person, a direct link to the employer. He received a caution for trying to scam me, a no contact order and a flag on his immigration file that, based on his country of origin, will likely mean he can never return, as well as a strict warning to not work without authorization. His roommates also received warnings. His employer received a visit next. They found significant proof that they'd been employing him illegally, as well as multiple other people. Their investigation is still ongoing, but so far they are likely to receive tens of thousands in fines or possible jail time. The guy isn't getting deported because the government would have to pay for it and proceedings take longer than his remaining visa time, but he's now upgraded from a flagged file to a multi-year ban on re-entry to my country. If he bothers me again, though, he will be deported as well. Hope he enjoys going back to his angry wife and the ridicule from everyone he knows. See ya again, never. Story: stepdad cheats on my mom, so we get revenge. Me, 24-year-old, my mother, 50-year-old, my brother, 23-year-old, my sister, 30-year-old, cheating stepdad, 45-year-old, Chris, stepdad's coworker, 25-year-old, Betty. The other woman, 40-year-old, Darla. This may be a long one, apologies in advance. I moved in with my mom after her marriage of 25 years with my bio dad was ended. He was a manipulative asshole, but that's another story. Shortly after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Chris. Now, my mom worked as a corrections officer at the county jail. The boyfriend was a former inmate, in for a DUI. That should have been the first red flag, But my mom was grieving a long marriage, and I didn't want to push the subject. Chris seemed to make her happy, and that was enough for me. Me, bro and sis all moved in with mom and Chris, and we seemed to get along okay. Chris and I bonded a bit over our love of video games, and all seemed well. That is, until 2017. Due to Chris's prior DUI, he had to go in regularly for probationary checkups at the courthouse. One day, he didn't return, and we got a little worried. We then received a phone call from him, from Texas. Turns out, when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was jumped by the FBI. His family from Texas was implicated on a number of gang and drug-related crimes, and due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was on the hook as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence, and allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was distraught, and over the course of many phone calls over a year, they worked out their marriage plans when he returned. His store owner at the DQ he worked at allowed him to come back as well, back to his store manager position. Soon after, the drinking started. Now obviously, because of his DUI, Chris was clearly no stranger to drinking. He began to drink more and more, to the point where he was consuming half a 24-pack of beer a day. Chris was a mean drunk. He regularly started fights when wasted, and while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress was getting to him from work and from the upcoming trial. Finally, after several years, my mom had enough. Chris came home extremely drunk one night, and my mom confronted him. She asked if he'd been drinking, and when he didn't deny it, she kicked him out. He went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather a few of his essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Betty, one of Chris's coworkers and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to share where she got the info from, Betty told my mom about how Chris was cheating on my mom with Darla. How he regularly had Darla perform sexual acts in and around his workplace. How Betty had caught them, and how Chris told her that if she ever told my mom, he'd fire her, he was the store manager. And finally, how Darla was pregnant. My mom was angry. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Chris's things, and to dump it outside. We took everything of his out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Chris had no reason or ability to return to the house, it was rented, with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. He confessed to the entire affair, and that he was happy Darla was pregnant because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids, we three were massive strains on her body, she likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions. My mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley, with an officer present, and he left our lives. Now, my mom clearly wanted to dust her hands of him and move on. She was already quite emotional from the whole ordeal, and wanted nothing more from him. But sis, bro, and I had other ideas. First, we called his workplace. DQ operates as an independently owned franchise, and the owner of this branch owned several branches in the area. He was also a good friend. We informed him of the sexual acts being performed on the premises, and he went through the processes of getting Chris booted from his position, and barred him from any of the branches in the area. Funnily, Betty got his position after he left, and now runs a tight and clean ship. Chris no longer had a job or a place to live, and so went to live with Darla in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another DQ in that town, and informed the owner of that location of the situation. It took significantly longer, due to there being no current and decent actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Chris began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Texas, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI, and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us, since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here was clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Darla's vehicle in our neighborhood, and that we believed Chris was driving it, without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they see it, as it would likely be seen driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were told that Chris indeed was pulled over, and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license, and while intoxicated. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at, and found several guns at the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Texas for the trial. Chris's son was born while Chris was in prison. Darla evidently realized what an absolute ass Chris was, and cut ties with him while he was in prison. During his prison time, Chris started sending tons of letters to my mom, stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back, and ranting about how it wasn't his fault, all in the same letter, mind you. Mom burnt every one of them. We moved on, moving out of state. Chris evidently got out of prison some years ago, and now lives in Kansas, struggling and fighting child support, which Darla sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend, who treats her right and cares a lot more than Chris ever did. Bro and sis moved on and out, and I still live with Mom, assisting her with the newly purchased home that we've been renovating. Lives looking okay. I was reminded of this by a chat with a coworker about cheaters, and thought to post it here for others to enjoy. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.